Right here in the heart of Africa lies one of the most resource-rich places on Earth. The Democratic Republic of the Congo is bursting with gold, diamonds, copper, and cobalt. The stuff that makes up our modern world. And yet, the Congo is one of the poorest countries on the planet. I want to tell you the story of this country. And to begin, we need to talk about Belgium. It used to be a small European country with no navy, no empire, and no global influence. Until one man decided to change that. Let me tell you how this guy, Leopold II of Belgium, took over the Congo, and how he almost got away with it. Back in the 1800s, Europe was in a race. Britain ruled over India, France had taken huge parts of Western Africa. Portugal and the Netherlands had been building empires for centuries. And then there was Belgium. A brand new country, fresh of gaining independence from the Netherlands in 1830, looking around at all its powerful neighbors and realizing it had nothing. No empire, no colonies, no global influence. To King Leopold II, that was a problem.
He wanted a colony where, he could reign supreme and where he could make a lot of money.
So Leopold went to Portugal and Spain, old colonial powers now struggling to hold on to their wealth. And he basically said, hey, I've got money and you need it, so let me buy one of your colonies. But both Spain and Portugal said no. So Leopold decided that if no one would sell him a colony, he'd just go get one himself, with his own money and army. He wanted a piece of Africa for himself. But you can't just march into Africa and take a huge part of it, at least not without an excuse. So he came up with one. He launched a philanthropic organization called the International African Society. It was meant to be a scientific mission to explore and map the Congo River basin. In 1884, Germany invited all the big players of Europe to Berlin. They wanted to divide Africa between each other into territories for colonization. The goal was to divide up the entire continent into colonies and make sure everyone got their little piece without fighting each other. This gathering was later called the Berlin Conference. Representatives from 14 different countries showed up. Among those present was King Leopold of Belgium. Leopold pitched the Congo as this untapped land of opportunity, a place where European science could flourish. He spun his story about bringing progress to the region, claiming he'd helped the people.
The king also very shrewdly presented himself as a philanthropist, somebody who was doing all this in order to bring civilization and Christianity to the poor Africans. And the other European countries already were in the process of seizing large parts of the continent. So I think they felt, why not let this philanthropically minded king have his piece as well.
And unbelievably, he convinced some of the biggest players in Europe, Germany and France, that his plans were for the greater good. He basically said, so I got this organization called the International African Society. I would like to take it and go take over this piece of land in Central Africa. And the world agreed. They saw him as a reformative monarch, wanting to uplift Africa and free its people from slavery. Leopold got his own cut of Africa, right here, in the central part, right where he wanted. This was a massive region, about 76 times larger than Belgium itself. By the time the conference ended, almost all of Africa was controlled by Europe. But while most of Africa was carved up by the European powers, the Congo was different. It was handed right over to King Leopold II as his personal private colony, his own private empire. And what did he do with it? He sends his army, takes control of the land, and starts exploiting any resources he can find, but mostly ivory and rubber.
Then came the rubber boom. In the late 1880s, they invented the inflatable bicycle tire to plant a plantation of rubber trees and wait for them to grow to maturity before they can be harvested. That often takes about 15 years or more. So the people who could really make money were those who had territory where rubber grew wild, and nowhere was there more of it than in the Central African rainforest.
He saw an opportunity. The Congo was very rich in rubber vines, and he thought, why not use these vines growing on trees and these people who live there to supply the rubber and make a fortune? So he created the red rubber policy. Basically, every village had to collect a certain amount of rubber for him, and if they failed, Leopold told his soldiers to cut off their hands and kill them.
The slave labor system he created to harvest this rubber basically involved sending troops into village after village, and the troops would hold the women of the village hostage, and you can see photographs of these women hostages in chains, in order to force the men of each village to go deep into the rainforest for days and sometimes weeks out of each month to gather a monthly quota of wild rubber. And of course, as the rubber price went up, that quota went up.
Historians estimate that around 10 million people were killed under the rule of Leopold in the Congo.
Famine became widespread because when you have, the women chained up and the men sent into the forest as forced laborers, there's nobody to plant and harvest crops and go hunting and go fishing and do all the things for which community normally feeds itself.
So Leopold earns a huge amount of money selling this rubber from the Congo. And he pours this money back into building infrastructure and boosting the economy. And guess what? It works. Belgian exports skyrocket by 300% by the end of the 19th century. At first, Leopold's industrial boom was seen as a success in Europe. He became a respected leader, admired for turning Belgium into a growing industrial power. But this progress came at a massive cost. Europe at the time had no idea about the atrocities Leopold was committing in the Congo. They all thought he was just doing what he promised, civilizing the region. Leaders of big countries like Queen Victoria and Wilhelm II also didn't really care about what Leopold was doing, because honestly, they were often doing these same kinds of horrific things in their own colonies. So for things to actually change, the pressure would have to come from the public. One of the first to speak up about these events was Edmund Dane Morel, a young official at a shipping company called the Elder Dempster. This company based in Liverpool had exclusive access from King Leopold himself to ship rubber from the Congo to Britain. From there, it was directly sold to companies all over Europe. Morel, the shipping clerk in Britain, handled trade records from the Congo, and he noticed how Leopold was sending guns, chains, and ammo to the Congo, and returning with loads and loads of valuable rubber. That didn't add up.
So he realized that he was looking at evidence of a slave labor system thousands of miles away. He very rapidly turned himself into the great British investigative journalist of his time, although they didn't use the phrase then, and devoted himself for a dozen years to putting the story of King Leopold's slave labor system on the world's front pages, and he really succeeded in that.
In 1903, he met Roger Casement, a British diplomat and explorer who had been chosen by the British government to investigate human rights abuses in the Congo. But wait, didn't I just say that countries like Britain didn't really care about what Leopold did in the Congo? Well, yes, this was true, but public pressure was starting to build. People across Britain, including journalists and activists, like Morel himself, were making noise. Newspapers were publishing shocking reports, so in order to calm down the people, they sent Casement to investigate. Casement traveled to the Congo, gathering evidence of brutality like photos. He met survivors and visited destroyed villages. His findings would later be called the Casement Report. Meanwhile, Morel continued to write. He started publishing articles and letters, exposing what he called the greatest crime of the century. He launched the Congo Reform Association, one of the first international human rights movements. He was doing his best, trying to expose Leopold, and this paid off. People were starting to listen, and more importantly, they were starting to care. Support for Morel grew, and with it, the pressure on Leopold's regime. Morel sent copies of their findings directly to Belgian politicians, royalty, and even the press. He traveled to Brussels to give speeches, and then Belgian activists began asking questions in parliament, forcing the state to take action. The pressure on King Leopold became too big to ignore. The press in France, Britain, and across Europe were calling it a humanitarian disaster. Stories of violence, abuse, and exploitations were everywhere. Even Belgian politicians were unhappy with Leopold, and his reputation collapsed. After months of public outrage and political pressure, the Belgian parliament finally stepped in, and they basically said, "Look, Leopold, this is a disaster. So we have to take the Congo from you." And then Leopold was like, "Okay, take it, but at least pay me for it." And Belgium did. They paid him around $1 billion in today's money.
But it's really outrageous that he not only sold it, he turned his colony over to Belgium, but he sold it to Belgium.
So in 1908, the Belgian government passed a law which officially stripped Leopold of his private control over the Congo and handed it over to the Belgian state. The Congo Free State now became a colony of Belgium. When Belgium took the Congo from Leopold, they built more roads, railways, schools, and government offices. Things seemed to be heading in the right direction, but in reality, the violence only became less visible. The Belgians kept exploiting the Congo, but now they had the world on their side. Morel stopped investigating the Congo in 1912. He even shut down the Congo Reform Association, believing its mission was mostly complete. So the Belgian government was free to do whatever it wanted. And so it did. Forced labor continued. They just called it different things like voluntary work, where workers would sign contracts without even understanding them. And then they were sent to mines or plantations to work for months or years at a time without pay. White administrators and companies stayed in charge, and their goals were the same: to extract wealth. Belgium did build more schools and hospitals, but they were basic at best. The goal wasn't to improve lives. It was to turn the Congolese into obedient workers. Education was mostly primary school, just enough to teach people how to read, write, and follow orders. Nothing more. White people lived in separate neighborhoods, had better services, and held all positions of power. Black Congolese could not even vote or have meaningful political influence. By the 1950s, the Congolese had had enough. They were tired of being exploited by Belgium. Young leaders like Patrice Lumumba began to rise up. They gave speeches, wrote articles, and organized political movements in order to free the Congo. They demanded independence. In January 1959, protests erupted in Leopoldville, the capital city of Congo at the time, and things quickly turned violent. The police opened fire on civilians. It was a wake-up call for Belgium. The government could no longer ignore the growing unrest. With international pressure mounting and more protesters on the streets, Belgium realized it couldn't control the situation much longer. So they called for a roundtable conference with Congolese leaders in early 1960. Surprisingly, Belgium agreed to a full transfer of power in only 6 months. And by June 30th, 1960, the Congo had gained independence. But the effects of Belgian rule were still clearly visible. At the time of independence, the Congo had just 20 university graduates. Think about that, just 20. Almost no one had the experience to run a government, manage an economy, or lead an army. Belgium had ruled for decades, but never prepared people to rule themselves. And that lack of preparation had consequences. The Congo, suddenly free but completely unprepared, struggled to govern itself. It quickly became one of the poorest countries on earth, a nation rich in resources, trapped in poverty, struggling to rebuild from the wreckage of colonial exploitation. And that's how Belgium's brutal exploitation of the Congo left a lasting scar on the country, a scar that is still visible today. King Leopold's so-called civilizing mission turned out to be one of the greatest humanitarian disasters in history. And while the Congo eventually gained independence, the legacy of colonialism is still felt today.